This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine. Hello, this is Breege Burke. Before we get into this week's podcast, I would like to thank my patrons personally. Polity, John H., Tanya T., Veronica S., Jeffrey B., Gabby, Helen M., Sunny H., Scott K., JRM, Susie G., Eldritch Priest, B. Lupita, C. Roberts, Jeanette, DS, Jake B., CDV, Ali, V!, Mary Beth R., Ida B., Eric N., Tana, May, and Gold_81. I really appreciate those of you who have joined recently and who have stuck with me over these years. Our community is small, and there's so much I would like to do in terms of providing courses, conversation on the dark feminine, and extra content, so please consider joining at patreon.com/Chthonia. Now on to the podcast. Hello and welcome to Chthonia, the podcast that deals with the dark feminine. I'm Breege Burke, and we are winding down 2024. We are getting to the end of the year, and usually in December I try to do beings, whether they be deities, fairies, or some other kind of feminine presence or spirit that is connected usually to the winter time or the coming of winter, sometimes specifically with Christmas. But we have gone over a lot of these legends in the past. I am reminded that I should probably remaster Frau Pirkta and Grilla and put that one up, because they're certainly a very popular figure around this time of year. That's one of the ones I had to pull to remaster from the first year of podcasts. And I know I have also done Skadi, who's connected with the winter in Scandinavian folklore. And if you'll forgive me, I'm going to be drinking some water in between because it is, speaking of winter, it is exceedingly cold out right now. We are supposed to have kind of a little warm up early in the week, but generally kind of Arctic temperatures have come pretty early. Not deep Arctic temperatures, maybe getting down to the low 20s at night, which is probably, okay, if you're in the UK or if you're in Europe, that's probably in the area of maybe -6, -7. So we're already having weather like that. And thus, I feel very, very dry. My lips are very, very dry. People complain about hearing that. I said it's going to get even worse. So, so I've got a glass of water next to me. So if I have to stop to do that, my apologies. Okay, we're coming to the end of the year, and I want to, the figures that I'm talking about, I have one that definitely is connected to Christmas, and that'll be the next one that I'm doing, called La Befana. Okay, she's an Italian, kind of a folk figure, witch-type figure who is associated with Christmas in particular. But what surprised me when I was researching this figure, and there's not a lot of information out there about this figure. I was surprised actually at how little there was, even in sources on fairy lore. But there is sort of a peripheral, tangential kind of connection to what we might think of as winter or winter preparations with this particular being, who doesn't really fall very neatly into certain classifications of fairies, which I'll explain. But this figure is called the Loireag. Now, the sources on the Loireag have been a little bit hard to get a hold of. I did find a live journal source, and it is basically the URL is something Slack autrum.livejournal.com, and I'll spell that SLUAGH-AOTROM, and it's basically, if you search Loireag on Google, this one is titled The Loireag, a Spinster Water Maid. Now, of course, a live journal, we may say, well, gee, that's not a very academic source now, is it, Breege? It's not, but they are actually citing all of the original source material, or at least quite a bit of it, on the Loireag, which I was not able to find through university academic searches when I actually went to look. The only article I could find mentions the Loireag as one of a variety of fairies that are connected, at least by that particular author, with the Cailleach. The Cailleach Bera in particular, the kind of the old hag or the old woman of winter. Now, whether or not the Loireag is actually a hag, certainly listed as being a spinster, which would suggest an older woman who has never married or never, in theory, never engaged in sexual intercourse. But also the idea that the Loireag is a water maid, is a water fairy. And that's really interesting because the Loireag is a type of a fairy that deals with weaving. Okay, she's connected to weaving, and she is connected with the proper traditional methods of weaving. So it's not just, it's basically she's concerned with the whole process from beginning to end in terms of, spinning and then how they put it. She presides over the warping, weaving, and washing of the web. And if women omitted any of the traditional usages and ceremonies of these occasions, she resented that neglect in various ways. Okay, now, again, this is from this article because it does list and it does give the original sources that they come from, and I will go through each one of these. So you've got this fairy connected to weaving, but this fairy is a water fairy, okay, which is interesting. But water nymphs tend to be associated a little bit more with, I don't know, we would think of them as being a little bit more connected to heart-centered things. Or alternately, they may be associated with the dangers of water, like your Jenny Greenteeth or your Peg Powler, who might, or Shellycoat, who might pull you down into the waters and drown you. But then there are the other types, like we talked about, the Selkie, for instance, who is a type of fairy who basically is basically a very loving type, like a type of fairy that you could take as a companion, right? So you have these fairies that are either, when you come to the category of water fairies, you have either the ones that almost seem like they are seductive women or beautiful women, who may be dangerous, or maybe at the very least are, I don't know, they may be representations of this, as I mentioned, this kind of soul figure when we talked about the Selkies. But the Loireag, no such thing. We're talking about a spinster. So we're talking about kind of an old unmarried fairy. I mean, I don't know that fairies get married, but that's the concept of a spinster is somebody who has always remained a virgin and never, it's usually used disparagingly, like the woman who's never chosen to have by somebody to be their wife, which nowadays, of course, we have our feelings about the whole idea of the spinster, right? But that's an unusual trait, I think, for a water fairy. Now, if she was a water fairy that was, like, say, dragging people to their deaths, then you might say, yeah, okay, she's a hag figure who is associated with the dangers of water. But that's also not the case. So the water association is very interesting here, because weaving, now we could think of spiders and weaving. Okay, think of spider webs, and spider webs sometimes have, those little dewdrops on them and so forth. So I don't know, maybe there's some kind of connection that we could make there. Maybe she's almost a spider type fairy. We can go back and talk about the story of Arachne, which is from, certainly Ovid talks about it in Metamorphoses, but this is about the goddess Athena or Minerva, about who is the patroness of weaving in the 12 Olympian pantheon that we see in both Greece and in Rome. So yeah, so we're gonna kind of get into that. But this particular source, and I think I just was it slackatrum.livejournal.com. Okay, I'm pretty sure I just said it. I did an initial run of this particular podcast, which I didn't like where I was going, so I stopped it and started over again. So I'll just repeat this one more time. Apologies if I'm repeating myself, but sluagh-aotrom.livejournal.com. Okay. So anybody who wants to look up that source, somebody had mentioned in one of the other, one of my YouTube videos, they asked for me to cite sources, and I said, well, I do, but I don't usually write them in the description. Because typically I'm putting up these, I'm doing podcasts every other week in addition to 8 million other things. So generally I'm writing a brief description, but I'm not writing, a bibliography at the end either, for the most part. So, So anyway, just repeating that for anybody who would like to look this particular source up. And there is this long discussion of the Loireag and all the sources that mention her. So we're going to look at that. And there was another site too that I had found, britishfairies.wordpress.com. Okay, so we're going to There's not as much in there, but those are the sources, main ones that I'm going to use. And again, if you're wondering why I'm not using more academic sources, they don't seem to be out there. I did find when I went through JSTOR and I went through some of the other academic databases, the only articles I could find mentioned the Loireag in passing as a type of fairy, and mentioned basically the same thing, that it was associated with weaving and making of cloth. That was about it. So what the most that I have is actually coming from these sources. So let's start with these sources before I start going in 8 million directions before we've had a chance to look at this. Okay, so I'm going to read this from this website that I just mentioned, this LiveJournal website. And this is an entry in a... it looks like this is actually meant to be kind of a lexicon of fairy lore. And it says, today's entry comes from the discussion of the connection between, let's see, I don't know if I'm going to say this one right, the Loireag, I'm not sure if that's pronounced Loireag, and the Loireag, which in turn came up from a discussion of another figure. And she says, isn't it funny how it all connects? So this first discussion of the Loireag comes from Catherine Briggs' Encyclopedia of Fairies, page 271. It says, Loireag. In the Hebrides, the Loireag is a water fairy, but like the lowland habitrot, she is a patroness of spinning. Grant Stewart, in his Popular Superstitions, said she presides over the warping and weaving and washing of the web, and if the women omitted any of the traditional usages and ceremonies of these occasions, she resented their neglect in various ways. Like all fairies, she is a connoisseur of music and was angry if one of the women had a harsh voice or sang out of tune. In Carmichael's Carmina Gadelica, the Loireag is described by a man from Benbecula as a small mite of womanhood that does not belong to this world, but to the world thither, and as a plaintive little thing, stubborn and cunning. Okay. So, already out the gate, we have a number of characteristics of the Loireag. First of all, she is a mite of a thing. So she is one of the teeny tiny fairies. She's little. But she's seen as plaintive. So plaintive, when someone is plaintive, there's a delicacy to her, right? And she also may have a very sweet singing voice, okay, when I think of plaintive. And clearly not of this world, especially somebody of that stature, but stubborn and cunning. And it's interesting that she's associated with being a spinster, because as we know in our characterizations of the dark feminine, that the quote-unquote hag figure of different types, or crone figure, is one who is generally wise in not only the ways of nature, but in the ways of the world. So there's this idea that she is, that there's a trickster element here. And of course, with all the fairies, there's a trickster element, because the fairies are they're liminal creatures. They dealing with them is always risky, because if you follow their rules, then you should be fine. But some of them just like to play pranks and be tricksters regardless. But they seem to be these kind of daemonic forces, and mind you, I'm not saying demonic, daemonic. Okay, big difference. They're little intermediary spirits that are they kind of almost like little household gods in a way, that are overseeing the basic things that are required for life and for survival. And the idea is that if you step out of line of that the danger that you face is very, very great if you don't do things correctly. So, okay, let's go on with this, and I'm going to get more in detail as to my thoughts on it. Respectively, the motifs here are fairy spin, also linked to fairy crafts, habitrot and tom tit tot, and kind water spirits, also linked to mermaids and selkies. Now, I imagine poor Loireag has long traveled back to the world thither because of the mechanical, soulless ways of making fabric, and the number of women folk that can't carry a tune. So, yeah, between the loss of the traditional way of doing things, and of course, number of people who can't carry a tune, myself included here, probably a great disappointment to the Loireag. Now, it's interesting as I'm reading this, I have on my bed, I used to have, I'd acquired various interesting stuffed animals over the years. You know how you have them even though you're a grown-up, you still have stuffies. Like I have a grumpy cat, an old tartar sauce stuffy. And I also have, I had different things at different times, but most of them I've given away or donated or whatever. So right now, the only actual stuffies I have, or besides Grumpy Cat, is a horse. It's a little blue horse made from kind of a almost like a tartan plaid. And this horse came from the Shetland Islands. Okay, so we're definitely talking, well, now we're going out to the islands, kind of between Scotland and Norway. But there was, and I'm reminded there that there's a lot of artisan craftsmanship that goes on in the Shetlands. We had gone to a folk museum, and that's where I ended up acquiring this little horsey. And I remember that they said, yeah, this horse was entirely handmade. Not the wool was spun from there's lots of sheep, obviously, on the Shetland Islands. The wool was hand spun, and then it was dyed, and then it was woven into cloth. And then everything, even the wool inside, is from Shetland sheep. Like, it was all made start to finish according to this old process. And it's interesting that I'm doing this particular figure, and I'm like, oh yeah, I actually have an example of that kind of traditional weaving sitting right on my bed. And it's so it's interesting to think about that. Now, obviously, that kind of process takes a very long time. And we live in a world when we're trying to mass produce things or do things very quickly. And of course, we have machines to do things. We could fall into the discussion of artificial intelligence and technology versus doing things by hand. It's actually kind of an interesting side topic now that I'm thinking about it. I'm going to have to make a note of that. But yeah, this is definitely a fairy connected to doing things the old school way, the artisan way of doing the craft of weaving. So, yeah, and weaving itself has certain connotations, certainly certain psychological connotations, but we will get there too. Okay, so to go on with this entry, they say from Alexander Carmichael's Carmina Gadelica, Volume 2, page 300 to 302, the Loireag is a water nymph, a water sprite, a water fairy. The Loireag presided over the warping, weaving, walking, and washing of the web. Wow, that sounds like something out of Monty Python, right? It sounds like, what's his name? The guy who plays Pontius Pilate in Life of Brian. But any case, and if the women omitted any of the traditional usages and ceremonies of these occasions, she resented their neglect in various ways. Okay, so that's being repeated from the Encyclopedia of Fairies. This is obviously where they got it from. If a song were sung twice at the walking, the Loireag would come and render the web as thin as before, and all the work of the women to no avail. So she was someone who could screw up your weaving if you weren't doing something right. And right, and if a song were sung twice. Okay, so yeah, so this is where we have, that's interesting. We have singing in connection with weaving here, that the two of these things go together, and that it's not only about proper weaving, but also about proper singing while you're weaving. So, and that interestingly also has a connection to Ovid, but we'll get back to that in a minute. I keep saying that, don't I? But we will get there. Okay. They had to begin anew and walk the web all over again, taking special care not to repeat the offense. If a woman with, okay, we're not going to try to read these Gaelic words, had a hard metallic voice, sang out of tune and overwhelmed the others, the Loireag was especially wrathful at her. So, yeah, definitely a strong connection between those two things. Now, here's the other quality that we see. A libation of milk had to be given to the Loireag. If this were omitted, she sucked the goats, sheep, and cows of the townland, placing a spell upon them so that they could not move. And this is a piece from Mary McInnes from Benbecula. Benmore was always eerie because of the Loireag dwelling there. The Loireag is a small mite of womanhood that does not belong to this world, but to the world thither. She was wont to drive the people out of their heart shrine with fear with my first recollection. But since the people were driven from Benmore, there is no person there whom she can frighten or dismay unless it's the big sheep. The Loireag is a plaintative little thing, stubborn and cunning. She is fond of milk and milk produce, and she would suck the goat, sheep, and cow when she could get the opportunity, and she would place a spell upon the creatures that they could not move from her. Okay, now this is interesting because this is something that we would often see when we hear witchcraft accounts, not only from Scotland, but certainly from the Puritans who moved to the New England areas. one of the things that people talk about is the way in which one bewitches a cow, right? This is one of the things that that witches are said to do. So it says, there was once a little cross Carly in Benmore, and the Loireag was sucking his cow. Now, Carly is basically a word for a free man. Okay, his daughter made an attempt to drive her away, but failed. She went in and told her father that neither the Loireag nor the cow heeded her. The little Carly leapt out the door in sparks of red fire, swearing at the impudent Loireag and at the cow. He threw a boulder at the Loireag, wishing to kill her, but struck the cow instead and nearly killed her. He then seized the point of the cow's horn in the name of Columba and the kindly, and immediately the cow leaped away from the Loireag, and she leapt away from the cow. Columba was the best leech of man and beast in Alban in his day, or I think they say it Alban. The Loireag betook herself up to the quarry of Corradale, her tune in her mouth and her tongue in her cheek, mocking the little cross-grained Carly and singing as she went. Now, I'm not going to try to repeat the song, and the song is just basically, she's just basically mocking him, calling him little Carly of Corryfoot, and referring to the calves-flecked female. And again, the meaning of this, I'm not going to pretend that I understand, but I guess it's, but she's basically mocking this man as she leaves. And she keeps using the phrase calves-flecked female, which I imagine there's a meaning to that, but I'm not sure. Maybe if somebody's aware of this kind of folklore, they might be able to fill me in on the meaning of that kind of jest or mockery or insult. But this is what we have on the Loireag. Okay, these are the kind of stories associated with her. So she's obviously connected with weaving and spinning, as well as singing while weaving and spinning. And she's also fond of milk. So if one wishes to have, to be good at weaving, they would leave a libation of milk for the Loireag. Now, here's this one from British Fairies at wordpress.com, or I should say .wordpress.com. The Loireag is a Highland fairy specifically responsible for overseeing the making of cloth through all its stages, from loom to fulling. She was a stickler for traditional methods and standards, apparently. Offerings of milk were made by home producers to propitiate her. So they're talking about the Gear Carlin, also having comparable links to cloth making, and we talk about the Gear Carlin in the Nick Nevin podcast, because that had to do with unspun flax that might be stolen. And this is why I mentioned the Loireag as a figure that, like a lot of winter-associated fairies, not only in folklore of England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, but also that comes from the Nordic, or even from Iceland, that a lot of these seem to have to do with winter preparations. Now, this is not specifically about winter preparation, because cloth would be spun. Cloth wasn't just spun. I don't think there was a particular season for it, although obviously there's going to be different seasons when one would be able to gather wool and do things like that. But the idea that it's connected to a spirit that, when we see this connection to the Gear Carlin and the idea of unspun flax not removed from the distaff at the end of the year, it would be stolen. And also it says if asked by the woman for the endowment of skill in spinning, she would enable the recipient to do 3 to 4 times the work as much as other spinners. Now, what does this sound like too? We also remember the tale of Rumpelstiltskin. Okay, there's a folk tale of Rumpelstiltskin. Now, Rumpelstiltskin is not the Loireag, but we see the similarity in story, because in that one there is a girl who is given, who is basically, I think somebody from her family, might have been her father, brags that she is able to turn, spin hay into gold. And so the king is very impressed, but he wants to see her produce this, and of course she's potentially could be put to death if she doesn't produce this gold. And so she sits in front of the spinning wheel and she's weeping, and then the little fairy shows up and says, "Oh, what's the problem?" So basically he says to her, "Okay, I will get the help. I will spin this this flax into gold." And in exchange, I want your firstborn. Now, that's kind of the fairy pact that she makes. And so she agrees. And so, sure enough, all of this is spun into gold. And later on, of course, when the king falls in love and wants to marry the woman, when they have their firstborn. Now she has to try to get out of giving her firstborn away. And it turns out that she basically has 3 nights to guess this little elf man's name. And if she can guess it, then she doesn't have to give the child over. And eventually she overhears him say his name is Rumpelstiltskin. And then she says it to him on the 3rd night, and he gets very, very upset. And then, of course, he runs off. But okay, so that's the tale of Rumpelstiltskin. But this is where we have the idea of a fairy figure that is connected with weaving. And in that case, you're talking about one that's able to weave flax into gold. So that's the idea of taking this raw material and weaving it into gold. Now, that is not what the Loireag is associated with. She is just associated with proper weaving of cloth. And it's just interesting to me that this is her role and that she's a water fairy. Now, again, the connection to spiders, and again, nobody's saying that the Loireag is a spider, okay? But there's legends around spinning that tend to, for obvious reasons, especially since they're saying, creation of the web, tends to associate these kinds of beings with spiders in some fashion. And again, that's not stated anywhere about the Loireag, but the story of the women sitting around singing a song and being punished if either they sing badly or they sing the same song twice, and having their work kind of thinned out and destroyed so that they have to start all over again, reminds me a little bit, at least in part of the spirit of it, or at least in part some of the details, really, from the story of the Minyai, which is from Ovid's Metamorphoses. And this is actually a myth connected to Dionysus, or Bacchus, as he would be in the Roman. And there's a festival of Bacchus that is celebrated, and there were festivals for each of the deities. Dionysus, in the Greek, certainly had several different ones connected with him from different times of the year. The Minyades, they did not want to participate in this. They were, they found the whole Bacchic ritual to be offensive and the drinking of wine to be offensive. So instead, they sat in their room and they spun their cloth and they sang songs to Minerva, or Athena, Minerva, who is a goddess of weaving. And Dionysus, or Bacchus, becomes angry at this and basically changes all of the women into bats, okay, because they were not singing the proper songs while they were weaving. Okay, now again, obviously, different story, different god, different context, but you have this idea of things being done in their proper place and time. And with the weaving, it's like Bacchus tends to represent this impulse where we break free, where you break free of social regulation and social rule. And the idea here was that they were, these women were like, no, we're not going to give ourselves over to this kind of chaos. We are going to continue to work in the service of order, and of the orderliness of this process, and of what we are expected of us as women, what our social role is, or what we're supposed to do. And so they get turned into bats, which are creatures of the night, really. So obviously, our other story from Ovid that is connected to weaving is the one of Arachne. Okay, and obviously spiders are referred to as arachnids based on this myth. And Arachne is a woman who is an excellent weaver. She's an excellent spinner, and she is so good that people have suggested that she is a better spinner than Minerva. And again, this is Roman, which is why I'm using the Roman names. And she herself boasts, somebody else says, that she has said that she is so good at what she does, she would be a better spinner than Minerva, which is never a good thing to do. So, of course, Minerva gets wind of this and appears to her as an old woman, warning her against hubris, against making herself better than the gods, suggesting, and she basically taunts the old woman and says, like, get out of my face. If she wants to challenge me to a contest, she can come here and challenge me. And lo and behold, the woman changes into Minerva and says, okay, you're on. So now there's a weaving contest between the goddess of weaving and Arachne. And they both weave tapestries with pictures on them. Okay? And The one that Arachne weaves is very insulting to the gods. It basically shows them in areas where they have been caught out and so forth. Now, it's really judged that in terms of quality, that Arachne's work is actually better than Minerva's. And Minerva is so enraged not only by this judgment, but also by the way in which this woman has no respect for the gods. So she changes the woman into a spider. And so she is continually weaving her web. So this is the punishment of Arachne for her hubris against the goddess Minerva, who was the patroness of weaving in Greek and Roman myth. I mean, obviously Athena in the Greek. So interesting, right? We have these conceptions of weaving and all of the proper protocol around weaving. Now, there are other creatures, if we're going back to fairy lore here, like brownies, for instance, who will come into the house and will do certain things. Like they will do certain chores for the person who owns the home. And of course, it's expected that there's like a give and take, that usually something is left out as a little gift, like a food gift or a milk gift or something for the fairies for their help. Of course, you never ever say thank you to a fairy. That's a part of that lore, that if you they get deeply offended if you thank them and they will never return again. So it's not something, so you just simply, it's more of a pact, like a give and take. I leave something out for you. I leave part of the milk products. I leave part of the, cakes, whatever, and that the fairy will take them and they will do something for you in exchange. And they're very much, you'll see a lot of these fairies that are very much connected with the household and household chores, which is why I say that they seem in function, they remind me a little bit of household gods. Not that the household gods of the Lares of ancient Rome were actually doing chores, but there's the idea that they are overseeing, protecting all that everything in the household is run and organized the way it should be. And that's the kind of sense that we get here, that they are weirdly they're liminal creatures who are interested in order and in process and in things being done the right way. We have this water fairy. And she's connected to weaving, okay, and proper weaving. She has a fondness for milk, so that is the offering that one would give if they want to be more prodigious, or in their spinning. If they want to produce more, then this, or they would be more expert. Then obviously they would want to engage the Loireag in this way. Now, as I mentioned, it's interesting that things like weaving and spinning, or excellence in weaving and spinning, become a feature of witch trials. You will frequently hear cases. I read certain witch trials during the Salem, Massachusetts witch hangings. And by the way, I remember hearing this in Cambridge. They were saying that people were burned as witches in America. Nobody was ever burned as a witch in the USA, or in its precursor, its colonial precursor. Like, people were not burned as witches, they were hung generally, or pressed to death in the case of Giles Corey. So so they're not, so anyway, people were hung as witches. At least one of the crimes that was associated with a woman who went to trial was her excellence, not only in spinning, but in doing housework. That she was so good, so efficient, and so fast that, the fairies, probably, in this case, everything translates to the devil, right? Meant that she must be a witch and must have a pact with the devil to make her such a great housekeeper. And so there you get into the idea of, if you're too good at something, it's because there's magic involved, right? If you're too good at something, somehow, you're getting supernatural help that's not Jesus, all right? So this is the way that they tend to do this. Okay, so it's interesting when we think about that. We think about the centrality of weaving. Weaving cloth to make clothes. I mean, clothes are one of the basics, right? If we're looking at Maslow's hierarchy, we're talking about food, clothing, shelter, that's kind of it right at the bottom of that hierarchy of needs. That's a basic need that everybody has. We all need some kind of clothing or covering, even people who are nudists. I mean, at some point, if it gets cold, you need something to cover your body, right? You're not gonna, there's going to be at some point where you need blankets or you need something. I mean, cloth has a lot of uses, not only for clothes, but also for bed coverings and things like that to keep people warm. So weaving is a fairly important, it's an important art. It's an important craft for providing that, one of those very, very basic human survival needs. Okay. And weaving takes on another connotation as well. Now, if you remember what I have said about tantra in the past, to weave is to... Okay, tantra is a word that literally means weave. Now, again, tantra is not. It's from India. It's a Hindu sect or Hindu branch, a branch of Hinduism, really, and Buddhism as well. So we're not trying to say that that in Ireland or in Scotland that they're tantrics, okay? But the idea of tantra, the idea of weave, is the idea that the disparate threads of life, more metaphorically, are woven together, that they go together, that they belong together in some way, or that things that don't necessarily, at least on the surface, seem like they don't go together, things that are paradoxical. We hear a lot about, combining fire and water as kind of a metaphor for this integration. You see it with the temperance card, or where you see the angel who has one foot on the land and one in the water. It's this idea that life is made up of disparate threads, so to speak, and and some of these are going to be, what we might think of as very spiritual, and some are not. Most of our life is very mundane. We're doing mundane things, mundane tasks to survive and to get on, and to make our living and do whatever. But the implication of tantra is that these things are spiritual in some way. That everything, if you're gonna treat this whole world and this whole our whole existence on the earth and perhaps in the universe as something that is you think about the wonder of the fact that life exists, right? Whether you see that religiously or not. When we have this, life as we know it's not a harmonious affair. Frequently, there's disharmony. You get a group of a certain size, you get people who are fighting with each other, arguing with each other, making problems. There just seems to be no way around that. This is kind of how human beings behave. And when you think about, and then we also have different ways of engaging with and enjoying life. Now, societies may have moral codes, and typically they are around excess. So things like, there's taboos around sex, there's taboos around eating, there's taboos around drinking. You'll see that all of these things are connected to what is taboo. And in tantric practice, all of the taboo things you are indulged in, because the idea is that these are just as sacred and holy as other things. The purity is not it's a concept, but purity is not what is stressed in a tantric system. Purity is something that suggests that some things are more holy than others. And Tantra would refute that idea and say, no, everything is holy. Now, you remember last podcast we did was on Tlazoteo, who is the goddess of filth in Aztec. And we also talked about the tantric Matangi as also being a goddess associated with pollution. And again, the existence of these goddesses suggests a holiness to things that we consider to be profane or that we consider to be repulsive. Now, the idea, though, is that those things are part of life. We can sanitize everything that we want. Everybody still craps and eats and does all the things that, that humans do. I mean, there's no way you're going to avoid doing those things. And if you're not doing those things, then you actually might have a problem. So, the idea is that, that we have all of these things that are both there are things that are beautiful, there are things that are ugly, and of course a lot of this is subjective to us. There are things that cause disease, which tend to be the kind of things that we view negatively. We don't want to be sick and have disease and die, at least not before our time. And but nonetheless, this is all part of life. And the reason that we have such a great imbalance is because we tend to just look at, all the things that we like, all the things that we want, and we tend to view everything else as kind of toxic. And what Tantra says is what the toxicity is also holy and sacred. And the idea is that you are taking all of these different elements of life, all the good things that have happened to you, all of the ways in which you have triumphed, all the ways in which you have accomplished things, all the things that have made you happy, with all of the things that have been sad and traumatic and have made you unhappy, have made you embarrassed, ashamed. Like, if you take all of these things, all of these are part of the tapestry of your life. And we are weaving. And I remember when I was in graduate school, and I may have said this somewhere before, I feel like I'm repeating myself when I say this, but one of the topics that had come up in my class on the Odyssey that I had done was Ginny, Dr. Phelan, had talked about the hero myth and the mythology of the hero. Now, those of you who have read Joseph Campbell or listened to his works, everybody knows he did the hero with 1,000 faces, which again, he talks about the monomyth of the hero. There's a lot of things that are questionable about that as kind of this monomyth. Anything reductive, you have to be a little bit careful about. But nonetheless, we do know that the hero myth is a thing. We see it as the myth of the divine child who grows into this, either a warrior or somebody who's on a quest or something. There's some kind of challenges, and then they usually have to go out and they have to have some kind of battle, or they have to, there's something that happens there. And eventually, when they succeed in their quest, then they have a treasure that they bring back, right? That's the hero myth. What Ginny had said was, she said, okay, well, that's a very masculine myth. That's the myth of moving away from the pastoral. And I talked a little bit about the mother complex and whether we're being a little hard on the mother archetype in my live stream that I did this past week. Is, okay, obviously there's this idea of us growing into individuals. Now, individualism is a masculine thing. Now, again, this is not critical or judgmental, like saying, yeah, it's masculine, therefore it's bad. No. But growing into an individual, developing into being an independent individual who is capable of taking care of themselves, that's actually a masculine process. It's moving away from the collective. It's moving away from the mother and the family to become one's own, and then perhaps they're going to be the one who provides the structure for the next family, in theory, right? So when we talk about the hero myth, we are talking about this process of psychological development. And I often feel that the myth of the matriarchy really fits into this. Is really just a way for people trying to make this myth a real thing in history. And I don't, and there's a lot of reasons why that's not a good idea. And there's also a lot of reasons why, even if it were true, it's not necessarily what we think. What is maternal is not necessarily peaceful. So, in any case, all that aside, one of the things that Ginny had said is, she said, that mythology of the hero is a male mythology. It's a male model of psychological development. And if we're living in a culture that's talking about development of the feminine, she says, then what would be a narrative that is feminine for development, for human development, for psychological development? And what she basically had come up with was weaving. Weaving is the metaphor for women, because you are taking different threads and you are seeing how they fit together. It's more like almost like putting a puzzle together in a way, or creating a work of art, that your life is a work of art that you are creating. It's a tapestry that you're weaving, okay? And it's interesting, so, we're kind of going a long way around here, but going back to the Loireag, you have this little tiny fairy who is cunning, but she not only wants, now she wants the milk. Okay, so it's almost like she's feeding on milk, and we think about milk as being, from the mother's breast. I mean, it's from the cow's udders, but it's that kind of idea, that this is the milk that one is fed on, that one is reared on, and she is the one who oversees the spinning and making sure that not only that it's done correctly, but that the songs that are sung are correct. that the music that goes along with it is as important as the process of weaving itself, and that she will cause trouble if it's not done properly. So, it's almost like it's like the little trickster figure who she may represent, and again, I'm sure this was absolutely not the intention of anybody telling any folk tales, but really, if you're thinking about the psychology of it, she could represent those aspects of life where we get off track, or we get distracted, or we get lazy and do the same thing over and over again. We sing the same song, right? And she'll get frustrated and say, no, we're going to tear that apart, and this is going to thin out. It's not going to work. And then you're going to have to start over again. And it's an interesting energy. We've been talking a lot now. Again, I have another channel where I talk more about astrology and things like that. Sometimes I talk a little bit about that here too. But if we think about the fact that everybody, and certainly among clients and students and different people that I've been working with, there's a strong sense that there is something that is falling apart, because there's something, it's almost like we've been going down a path now that's no longer helpful to us. And we need to make changes. If you're talking astrologically, one of the big things people are talking about is, Pluto moving out of Capricorn and into Aquarius. This is like a new age, new things to contend with, new things to dig up and examine, which is kind of the nature of Pluto. And in that process, people are finding that there's things in their lives that they've always done that just aren't there anymore, or that are falling apart, or that unexpectedly are just taken away. And I think this is part of that. I mean, I think the idea of this tiny little fairy who comes in and undoes the work that you did, and she does it because either there's something you're not doing right in the process, or she's doing it because you're not singing the right song. And so there's the idea that you need to either learn to sing properly, or you need to change your tune, literally. And that otherwise she's going to have her, take her wrath out on you. So she's almost this aspect of the feminine that you would connect with, again, if we're talking astrologically, with like Uranian energy, or if we're talking tarot, we're talking about tower energy. That's something that tears down something that is wrong, that is false, or it's like the Eight of Cups energy. Interesting too, like if I'm trying to connect her to water, Eight of Cups is when you have the cups that are full, but you have to abandon them, okay? And you're walking away to do something else because those cups are no longer for you. That's no longer what you're doing, okay? So to me, so to connect her with water, this connects her very, very strongly with the feminine realm. But the fact that she's a spinster, that she's this little old hag fairy, also connects her with the wisdom of the crone. Somebody who has that wisdom and experience and is showing you how to weave. She's almost like a little figure that's showing you how to weave, and who will get very irritable with you if you don't do it properly, in the way that fairies do. They have certain ways, and you don't want to cross them. And really, again, you can look at this also as the ways in which we disconnect ourselves from nature, or don't pay attention to nature, or bypass it, or frustrate it, and the way in which the consequences for that can sometimes be very scary, because nature is a force that we think we have conquered, but far from it. So anyway, I'm not going to wax on too much beyond that. I think that covers the topics that I wanted to discuss here. I do hope you found this interesting. I would like to know your thoughts. And those of you who might be closer to this kind of folklore and know a little bit more about it and might be able to shed light on some details of things, obviously I'd be happy to hear your thoughts and comments. But thank you so much for listening. If you did enjoy this episode, and you are, if you're not subscribed to the Chthonia podcast, please consider subscribing on whatever podcast app that you use. If you are on YouTube and you're not subscribed, subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you're notified when I have new videos coming out. Generally, it's only one every couple weeks. I try to upload a live stream on alternate weeks, and some weeks I fall behind, like this week, but I will be updating everything there, because I do a live stream on Mondays usually, sometimes Thursdays, depending on, this week I had to do it on Thursday. on the Chthonia podcast, one word, Instagram feed. So I usually do them around noontime, and I always will post like a little thing saying, "Hey, live stream today." So if you want to follow those, I have those. If you want to follow me on social media, like I said, it's Chthonia podcast, one word, Instagram. I do have a Blue Sky account, but again, I haven't even started looking at it yet. So I've gotten rid of X, and I am still on Facebook, Chthonia podcast, 2 words, and YouTube. YouTube, it's just Chthonia, but again, on both Facebook and YouTube, if you do at Chthonia podcast, 1 word, you'll find me. So if you are interested in supporting my work, I have Patreon, patreon.com/Chthonia. And of course, you've heard that I thank my patrons at the beginning of the episode. All paying members get a thank you at the beginning, in addition to getting special podcasts and sometimes free courses in the Institute for the Study of Feminine Myth, which is my school. And again, you can check in the description for this podcast, or if you're on YouTube, the description box below will list all my websites, and also my For Chthonia merch, too. If you like the Chthonia crow, or if you like I have the woman looking at the crow, those were both designed by my friend J.R. Malpair. If you like those images and would like them in t-shirts, mugs, whatever, I do have a merch shop as well. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you again in the next episode.